I genuinely thought I would be taking it easy after Art Fight and then coming back feeling very refreshed and on top of things. And of that checklist of things, the only thing I've done is come back. But hey, at least I'm back. With how busy everything has been and Ren Fair season in full swing, I am dying to start a big, complicated project. But instead, I've elected to be a little bit reasonable, which is very cool, be very proud of me. And I've decided to do a single episode of Redesigning My Childhood Characters by randomly rolling your suggested aesthetics. So let's get right into it and spin that wheel! For this character, I've rolled one of the teenagers, Jacob, with the randomly rolled aesthetic Blood Punk. Blood Punk is a little bit of a unique aesthetic in that I found two looks that sort of fall under that category. The primary and I think most accurate definition of Blood Punk is that it's not just a look, it's also a world building setting. Think of Blood Punk in the way that you would think of something like steampunk, cyberpunk, and eco-punk, in that the world has become fueled by a specific source of power, and in this case, blood. A very good setting for Critical Role's homebrew D&D class Blood Hunter. And in the general vibe and clothing, you find a lot of Art Deco and Victorian influences, vampiric color palettes, and a lot of tubes and pipes and fun, mysterious red liquids. The other version of Blood Punk that I've seen is a more literal interpretation of the words, still with the more vampiric color palettes and aesthetics, but I think punk in a more modern fashion sense, as in non-conforming modified DIY clothing with lots of metal spikes and pins and hardware with an additional sense of viscera. I was incredibly non-committal with Jacob's character design. I was really excited to work on a Blood Punk character, and I did have a vision, albeit a very nebulous one, of what this should look like, and I don't think I was consciously trying to not fall hard on either side of the Blood Punk scale, but I don't think I fell hard on either side of the Blood Punk scale, and it landed me in a weird zone where I'm not positive I fulfilled the prompt at all. That being said, I do really like the design, so I'm just gonna walk you through my thought process and my visions and why I did what I did and how we ended up with like a younger yassified version of Bobby from K-pop Demon Hunters. First of all, we are doing a major detour for Jacob in terms of appearance, because tell me why the original art kind of looks like the onceler from the Lorax? I'm bashful. Okay, we're not doing no Tumblr sexy man here in this channel. And a lot of the women in my Redrawing Childhood Characters have had dramatic visual changes because in terms of art, I think I've become at least marginally more inclusive in my drawing abilities than when I was 12. And a lot of the art of the very few men that I do draw are tall, long anime leg man, because I don't draw men very often, so I'm mostly focusing on just drawing a man in general instead of adding a lot of variety in my character designs. So this time I have made a conscious decision to include a little bit of body diversity for my masculine characters because they deserve it too. Before I go on a detour about the different clothing aspects of this design, let's just take a moment to mourn the loss of this aesthetic as a potential fantasy knight. Blood Punk Knight would have ate. May that idea rest in peace. It would have been so cool. Imagine all of the little tubes and the pipes and red and blood magic. Oh, I'm so bummed. That would have been right up my alley. Although, technically, speaking of things being up my alley, and a little bit of spoilers for my own future plans, of course I have a Blood Punk themed section of Vassal Doll in my D&D campaign book that I am looking forward to making so much art for. So, I'm not that sad about it, but oh, can you imagine? What a loss for this series. And you might be like, oh, Lady Splitchin, you silly goose, this is fantasy art and you can do whatever you want. The constraints that you have made are only ones that you have imposed upon yourself. True, and true in life as in art, but you do not understand how much I cannot do whatever I want. I have to adhere to the little art laws inside my brain, or else something terrible will happen and I will implode. These are teenagers, not all of them can afford to have completely impractical closets, and also imagine the dry cleaning costs. So the general rule is, despite it technically being a fantasy setting, the teenagers' outfits have to be at least somewhat achievable in real life, and I'm going to do my best to stick to that. Of course, one of the main things that I was positive I wanted in the design, regardless of what I did with it, was a pair of glasses with red tinted lenses. I mean, how could I not? It doesn't matter if you're being punk or Victorian, or more importantly both, you need a pair of glasses that are tinted red. One of the decisions I was less sure was doing the corpse paint blackout neck, which I know is technically a goth thing to do and does not strictly go with punk or Victorian, but I just think it's neat, and I also feel like corpse paint and blood punk as words have very similar vibes, which is kind of all I've got as far as excuses go. But I just think with the deep open v-neck that he has with his shirt, I felt like there was a jarring emptiness, and at some point I do add a chain to help with the shapes, but I thought, hey, what if instead of drawing a bunch of layered necklaces or trying to work a Victorian collar in mysteriously, what if I just make it all one color? I'm still not positive that it was the right decision artistically, but I do think I like it, and also at this point in the rendering process it would be not a fun thing for me to have to reverse. Speaking of punk and goth, I have not a hot take, maybe a tepid, lukewarm take. I feel like we jump to use the word goth to describe things a lot nowadays, which I myself am definitely guilty of doing, but I don't think we describe enough things as punk, especially in such an era of anti-establishment, freedom of expression, and DIYing. More punk. Anyways, let's confront this jacket, which goes through several different iterations over the course of this drawing. I think it started out as a normal jacket, and then I cropped it, and then I took the sleeves off and made it more of a cropped vest. And right now you can see in the process I have all these dangly straps and little red teardrop shaped gems, and because I guess I felt like there still wasn't enough going on, I began adding in a bunch of hardware and metal bits. There are studs, there are pins, there are random clips and clasps, and of course plenty of little silver buckles. And I think it was at this point where I really was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do with the drawing. I actually almost tossed it out entirely at this point. If I wasn't already so burnt out and short on time from life as a whole in general, I probably would have, and the jacket really was pushing me to the edge of just pulling a drawfee and deleting my art, but I didn't, and you don't have to delete yours either. The problem was that I was really fixated on trying to remedy the fact that I felt like this drawing wasn't punk enough, which wasn't all bad. It did bring me to solidifying this piece as closer to one of the two blood punk aesthetics. It also filled a lot of the empty gaps in the drawing as well, like the space on the side of his leather jacket vest situation, and the space created by the large swath of dark red that is his pants. But I realized that actually my problem with this not looking right wasn't about how punk it looked, it was actually just with the overall shapes of this piece. So I guess, to be totally honest, I did delete some of my art. As pretty as the gems and the straps were, I felt like dangling they were giving more of that fringe and flare look, and it wasn't giving off techie or punky. I began zooming out more and tried to focus less on little tiny details, and decided to figure out how to make Jacob's overall shape and color palette feel good and balanced to me. And I did a lot of deleting art that I was adding after the fact, because this whole thing was just a lot of trial and error. Like, I tried to bring the silver down with more chains and then changed my mind with that. I tried to change the pants to make it a wrap tie situation and undid all my work on that. At the very end of things, I figured out my shape problems and added in more straps and blocks of color and fabric to try to unify things. I ended up adding in straps in a contrasting color but in a sort of swooped fashion to sort of mimic the shape of a rib cage, and also at the end I added a drape cape piece, I think, to the back of the vest. I don't know if it's a cape, I don't know if it's like random sleeves. Just do not ask me to draw what this man looks like from the back. I just know in my mind it is such a silly garment as a whole, but what can I say? It brought peace of mind to me and the way the design balanced out, so I'm just gonna call it good. In my mind, Jacob as a character is very passionate about his outfit choices, and he curates his closet to have very few pieces, but pieces that are unique and high quality, hoodie that he absolutely adores and wears all the time. Despite the whole vibe that the word blood punk gives off, I think Jacob is actually just like a goofy, wholesome guy. He's like if the black cat girlfriend and the golden retriever gamer boyfriend combined into a single person. Although, to be fair, that's not that unusual, and in my experience, a lot of punks and alternative folks are just a bunch of golden retrievers that look like black cats. But that does bring us to the end of this speed draw. I know it was a short one with only one drawing. I hope you guys are okay with that. I just needed to take things just a bit slower while coming back. While I'm not convinced I exactly did blood punk justice as an aesthetic, I do really like this character design. I think he adds a lot to my collection of redrawn teenagers as a whole. He's very warm and saturated and just different from a lot of the characters that I've drawn so far, which I guess is what happens when you draw 11 different characters over the span of almost a year and a half. And actually, on the note of it being a year and a half, I believe Jacob is the last of the random teenagers that I had in terms of childhood characters, which means as far as this Spin the Wheel series goes, all I have left are a few fantasy knights, and I am so excited to get to those designs and to find out which aesthetics will be the last few that I will be working with. But until then, who knows? Not me.